than in the GATT-W that is on the general level, be it only, as I mentioned, by taking the exceptional rights and the special rights from away from the developing countries. So, next. I will give you at least one example, which is something besides which I gave right before I came here to the German ambassador, who was interested also in understanding why Tanzania has not yet signed. I gave him exactly the same example, and you have to bear with me, or I beg your pardon for asking you to read with me the text in the bubble for once, because then you will understand also your own negotiators better, why they are so hesitant to rush into that stuff. How does he, first of all, infant industry protection clause sounds good. What is it? There are new industries, fledgling industries in these countries, industry which you are dreaming of, and as most kids in the real world, also infant industries need protection in their first years. Yeah? Infants need protection. And so that in such an agreement with a powerful European Union, an infant protection clause is introduced is a good thing. The problem starts already that the EU didn't concede that right from the beginning. It was your negotiator who insisted that in all the imported EPAs in the West, East and South of Africa, these infant protection clauses should be introduced. So one could say fine, but now read the bubble. Now read the bubble. EAC-EPA states may take safeguard measures where a product originating in the EU as a result of the reduction of duties, is imported in such increased quantities as to cause disturbances to an infant industry here in Tanzania producing like or directly competitive products. Article 50 of the draft EPA for the EAC. Again, at first glance, you might say, well, but that's perfect, isn't it? That's perfect. Unfortunately, it is not. Unfortunately, it is not. Because imagine now the classical situation, and that is very much also in the in line of what your president is aiming at over these years. Imagine that you try to establish new industries here in this country, that is, industries that never were. And as these industries are completely new, the situation, there is a reduction in the rate of duty with this 85% liberalization. And the increased imports cause disturbance to an infant industry, and then you can react. But that is not the situation for an industry that never were, because either take micros, or take fans, or air cons, or refrigerators, it has ever been 100% imports. There is no increased import after trade liberalization. You never produced that stuff. It was always, and everything was imported. But that is exactly the kind of infant industry that you would probably like to protect for a time, isn't it? So the thing is, and the East African EPA infant protection clause is actually the worst. It is deliberately phrased in a way that it does not give you the policy space for the most important configuration in your proposed industrial policy. So at first reading, you certainly agree, at first reading it's good. At second reading, when you are applying it to the most important case, it is rubbish. So now you could, and as a less important developing country, which is not drawn to for every infraction to WPO panel, you should perhaps try to muddle yourself through in having read the thing a bit badly. How many minutes? 10 minutes, yeah, I managed. This is a good information, Prof. So this is just one example. I spare you all others, but it is about the same with all the other clauses, where you could say, or Brussels will tell you anyway, we have introduced or we have respected so many of your concerns, but at closer look, there is a problem. I have all this in this technical paper. Okay. So, in some, Tanzania and Nigeria had some good reasons to be reluctant to sign. As I said, it will become complicated by the slide. Next. So, now what does this situation that Tanzania and Nigeria have not signed, and even independently from that, mean for the region? I mean, as we have now seen some good reasons not to sign, we could simply stick to that and stop. In the beginning, the ideal EPA map of what would have happened, I hope that you can see it from the rows behind, looked quite idyllic. There is a north, and the west is covered in one corner with one agreement. In the east, that is the 5 East African countries of the time are covered by one, and in the south it is all in one country. In the middle, unfortunately, there are a number of countries that have no agreement with the EU altogether. For the south, it was not exactly accurate even at the time, because already it was 2 EPAs, but at least, you know, the outcome, if everybody had signed at the time, looks quite okay. Looks quite okay. Now, so after these refusals to sign, and it's a long story now, the customs unions in all 3 African regions are cut to pieces, because now a number of single countries, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Cameroon, have so-called individual interim EPAs, so they signed, take well note, they signed to preserve their export interests to Europe, by the way, all middle-income countries. They were part of REC treaties, the so-called SADC EPA, which is actually ZACU plus Mozambique, plus another one. So we have the disarray here in West Africa. We have a special market access regulation for Kenya, and the others are falling back on everything but arms, and we have a lot of let-alone countries. So what looked quite idyllic in the beginning now is a complete pulverization, a complete disarray, as you can see on the following graph. There next. There comes a trigger, push on the trigger. You have no mouse, huh? Okay, go ahead. Here, look at this map. This is now, you don't have to study it in detail. It is recently, some months ago, from the European Commission itself, showing you the different configurations that we now have in Africa. You see there Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Cameroon are differently shaded than the rest. Nigeria is different from the others. Kenya is different, and so on and so forth. It is a complete, this map I mean, I wonder why the European Commission published this map, because it showed such a disaster, and it is almost the opposite to African unity, isn't it? Vis-a-vis Europe. Go one back, please. No, back. Okay, so worse even, and my director advised me not to delve on that too lengthily, but at least I mention it briefly. At the same time, by this disarray which I have shown you, the current situation invalidates your common external tariff that you should have here as a customs union in East Africa. Huh? So having the same import regulations vis-a-vis the EU and all others besides, by extension, for all countries in the region. It invalidates it, because Kenya now has a completely different schedule and also a different tariff book than the others have. So, and here comes in now the political problem, which puts the stakes so high. If that stays as it currently is, if that situation stays as it currently is, it is the end of the ambitions of the East African community to become a customs.
I was being polite, being brief.
Good afternoon. My name is Clive also. I have a brief overview of what you say, a brief overview. First of all, if we weigh the pros and cons of the integration, it seems like the disadvantages make sense more than the advantages. Why? Questions. Do we have the same negotiation power? As if we measure at the rate of development, Africa or East Africa in general, we are at the monetary union. And if you look at the Europeans, way forward, or even more than monetary, they are coming into political union. So these two sides, do they have an equal negotiating power? If we measure also, I'll take an example. You have a school, you want it to achieve better. You have those who are doing well and those who are doing less than others. You cannot achieve at the school at once without empowering those who are there. Look at the Industrial Revolution in Europe. It was way back there, 18th century. We are now moving very slowly into Industrial Revolution. How can you expect these people to have the same negotiating power? The question is, was that integration or what the treaty prepared unanimously, or it was just an imposition for us to adopt? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Mombeki Kamara. I want to ask if there is a problem, according to you, whether we should stick with the Cotonou Agreement, given that the level of stability between the European Union and the East African community at the moment, they are kind of incomparable. You know, you mentioned the stages, and at the moment, European Union is in the economic union, but at the moment, we're just playing which hand. Rwanda doing something against Uganda, Burundi accusing the other. So under such kind of a situation, and considering that the European Union, which is highly industrialized, has been subsidizing their farmers for a longer time, and also even if Britain is claiming to want to be out of the European Union, it has also been one of the countries which has been highly subsidized for those who are being involved in agriculture. So basing on our agrarian society in Tanzania, where we haven't solved the agrarian question, for such kind for us to proceed with EPA, isn't it better to just stick with the Cotonou Agreement and not try to force the grounds? Thank you.
In the back, here in the left wing from my side, talked about the different negotiation power. as an argument for him why the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. Indeed, you may be right. The fact that you have different negotiating powers, also that the dice are in a way, how do you express it in correct English? The dice are in a way tilted towards the one party. Different negotiating power can indeed be a very precautionary argument that in a situation which is so complicated as I described it, you perhaps better stay away, because otherwise you will be drawn into technical things that you cannot possibly master in face of 150 highly trained European trade experts and all their profs behind. So it is an argument to consider even independently from the simple text. Now the young man on the right asked, shouldn't we stick perhaps better to Cotonou instead of signing the EPA, as long as we are, in fact, in a way it rejoins the other argument, in a situation where we have still internal conflicts, we cannot support our farmers equivalently and so on, while the EU can. In fact, that is one of the alternatives that your government has to consider in earnest. Cotonou expires in 2020, but the everything but arms scheme, which is for least developed country, goes on as long as it applies. So at least you as Tanzania, not as a group, but as Tanzania, you will have, you tell me, growth projections have been downscaled by the IMF to 4%, I read. So you will have a couple of years under the $1,000 threshold, and during that period you can happily live on, except for the EAC as a group, but as an individual country you can happily live on instead of venturing into such a thing, such an agreement. And okay, there is on my birthday, the 21st of October, we elect a new European Parliament, and they will elect a new European Commission. And with the incoming Commission, you might stumble across a Director General for Commissioner for Trade who is more open-minded to Africa, so things might change. So the alternative to live happily on as long as you can is not absurd. I fully agree with you. But.
I had 3%, but I'll go as one. Who said there are two countries that have signed EPA, Tanzania and Nigeria. I understand there are countries that have signed interim period into this agreement. What are the risks in these countries?
The reason for this? The risk, this is a good one as well, the risk for those countries who having signed the interim EPAs. Yeah, there are risks. These are not the happy guys. And besides, they are not feeling happy. I was, 1.5 years ago, I was in a conference with the trade officials from Western Africa, and the Ivorians and the Ghanaians, they are not happy with the situation. First of all, their liberalization schedule is even quicker, more rapid. They have to liberalize quicker than is now foreseen in the regional ones. First thing. The main thing is it is an interim EPA, so they have no guarantee that the European Union will continue with that stuff, and they face obviously the same disadvantages for ECOWAS as well. So no one is happy, and those signatories are not happier than Tanzania. And they don't even feel like that. they tell you quite openly that, for instance, for Ghana and Ivory Coast, it matters to preserve their free of charge cocoa exports. It was mainly a cocoa issue, because they are both middle-income countries, and even raw cocoa is hit by a tariff. If you process your cocoa to cocoa liquor or cocoa mass, the tariffs are even higher. So if they have not had this interim EPA, even their main agricultural product would be hit by tariffs. So it is not out of a search for happiness, it is out of sheer necessity that they signed.
I'm Faraja Christomas. I have just one question. Dear Professor, do you consider the agreement between European Union and East African or Africa in general is the union between, or is an agreement between an old person and a very young person or a child who are unequally powerful? In the sense that, for us, we are still struggling. For example, East African community is still struggling at the level of common market and the single market. But European Union has gone further. And it's like a giant is entering into agreement with a very junior person, a young person. As a result, he will always exercise full powers over a junior one who is defenseless. Who cannot defend himself or herself. Do you agree with that? Thank you.
Be very brief. I would like the professor to also comment on this principle of reciprocity. You know, why the European Union should seek reciprocity from the least developed countries, whereas the spirit of WTO was actually to give concessions to least developed countries so that they can catch up with their development with the developed countries. And what is being proposed under EPA is putting a lot of pressure for least developed countries to open up their economies on the basis of liberalization, of course, and to trade with Europe on reciprocity. That is, we open up, they are removing the duties on the basis of all but arms, and they are going also to bring their goods to us, and we have to forego the customs duties we are charging their goods because they are opening up the customs duties. They are removing the customs duties for our goods here. And let me add, a country like Kenya. Kenya is rushing to this agreement because as a developing country, they do not have all but arms access to the European markets. So, but under EPA, they will have, because it will be reciprocity. So they will sell their goods on the basis of least developed countries. And that is why, and I'm happy the professor made this point, that Tanzania does not see the need to really rush into EPA, because under all but arms, we are enjoying a better regime than if we confined ourselves to EPA. Can you comment on that? Thank you.
That allows me into this, to respond to this graphic description of unequal negotiating partners, the giant versus the, how did you term it? The junior. Okay, that was at least polite towards yourself. You know, again, obviously this is again on unequal negotiating power, but you should see that the giant, again, is not a single-minded one. The discrepancy in negotiating power is there, full stop. But the giant has different ambitions. Believe it or not, Europeans and also European powers, not necessarily the DG Trade, but the other departments in Brussels, take development seriously. Take development seriously. We are going into a campaign. I'm a member of the Green Party in Germany since decades. And we are going into the European election campaign in defending Europe as a region of peace, as a region of freedom, and also as a region of true international cooperation, besides also being more liberal on immigration from Africa than is currently the case. So you can always count on, as I said before, diverging interests and also different values in the head of the giant, instead of only one trampling on your interests. So then what Mzee asked on the principle of reciprocity, this is a good one as well. The ideological premise of the EU, it must be an agreement which approaches reciprocity is rubbish. As a two, probably that is the answer you hoped for, is rubbish. There is no need for reciprocity, and that is why you should insist on there should never ever be more than at least that bit of non-reciprocity, that is these 15% that is there, plus the clauses that should allow you to have even less reciprocity in preserving strategic goods that you are now going to produce, which would also backtrack a bit on this degree of reciprocity has been reached. But as a matter of principle, all what they are saying in Brussels about the need for reciprocity is rubbish.
Hey, let me say, I don't want to be accused of giant bias.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question. One of it is that we need a fresh look maybe on the EU EAC agreement, this EPA agreement, because ever since this started, it has been a while, and so many things have actually really happened. For those who have either signed, the ACP countries, and so many things have changed. And not only that, we also have got this break, of the Brexit, which is very, Britain is a very important bilateral trade, with East Africa. So with that, is it that important that we basically, look at really the economic impact of all of this? Not only that, of course, my gentleman here has also applauded the thing of the, we still, enjoy the equal everything but arms, and also the GSP. So, we still can, take time to sign this because we are still enjoying, certain, benefits under GSP and the EPA. So my recommendation is that maybe we needed to look at this afresh because some of these things might have been outdated given the industrial revolution that is happening, in this world.
As Africans, we start to lose more than gain in these agreements. And my question is, as Prof had said at the beginning that after the SAPs, some of the African countries are now trying very hard to come up with the policies that would actually lead to the development, especially with the question of industries. And as we all know, what were the SAPs disadvantage to these countries, especially with the question of economy, that most of our countries were made in a way to become consumers of what they don't produce and export the natural resources to a large extent. Now, can we rightly say, without sugarcoating, that these agreements are in a way another form of SAPs that are able to maintain the existing situation of making the African countries exporters of the natural resources and importers of the manufactured goods? Thank you.
On the first lady in the back on the fresh look, I mean, it confirms in a way what I said. You can stay for a while. You mentioned several alternatives for a fresh look, but your fresh look was rather 1-2 countries and for others. Nigeria, for instance, now falls back on GSP. But this is already less advantageous because, I mean, you can even say, would raise a completely different box, that falling back on the general scheme of preferences is like another resource curse measure for mineral-rich countries. They can export their mineral riches still free of charge, as Nigeria oil, to Europe, but many other products are now hit by tariffs. So it hampers Nigeria's own industrialization mode. GSP is not a good fallback option if you take this fresh look. So as you mentioned as well, the Brexit thing, and that UK is in fact an important trade partner and development partner. This has a bearing on EPA because already the development program, the so-called development matrix contained in the EPA, is obviously outdated because one important development and trade partner is no longer there. There are less resources left. But again, on the side of the expectations, do you please not expect the Great Britain, for the important trade that you have with them, to offer to you better terms. Do you please do not expect that. When they are kept in against the will of the Brexiteers in the customs union, it is technically excluded anyway, and they can't do trade agreements with other countries on their own. Even if they fall out of the customs union, as a weaker partner, I doubt that they will offer better terms. There is one nice example. The UK administration already kind of initiated the first trade agreements with other partners without knowing already if they are at all allowed to do that. It's quite a funny move. I mean, the British are funny anyway, very funny indeed. So, and guess which was the first group of countries and on which terms, with which they initiated the first new trade agreement. It was the so-called ESA group, these Eastern and Southern African country groups, Zimbabwe, Madagascar, Seychelles and Mauritius, which they initiated a new trade agreement, and it is verbally copy and paste of the existing EPA, which is already provisionally in power. So it is exactly the same thing that the Brits offered to them as what they unfortunately already are. So this is too cautious. So this was a bit long. Yeah, then the lady in front here who sensed very well when pondering the pros and cons that I deliberately drew a parallel with the structural adjustment programs of the 80s and early 90s, when I was already around in Africa as a government advisor, and I was furious, not only with the World Bank, but with my own government, that they supported these subs. And is it now going to happen again? Yes and no. Obviously, the EPAs continue with the trend that started with the subs, the trend to force you into further liberalization. It definitely does. Only that the subs, during the sub period, because of the financial difficulties of the time, you had no line of defense. And this is the main difference. Now in the EPAs, there are lines of defense where you do not have to accept everything in terms of liberalization. And for instance, to be even more precise with regard to the subs, if you want to now to roll back some of the deindustrialization effects that the subs had also in Tanzania, destroying the textile industry almost across Africa, you should have precisely that industrial policy space to support that. We talked about that is why it is so important. So my answer is yes and no.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Ibrahim Kata. Thank you for this opportunity. As we all know that most of European countries, most of capital is owned by private entities, which is very contrary to the African countries. Don't you see that this agreement will be another way to concentrate with to the few hands of people in European countries? Thank you.
These EPAs perhaps contribute to concentrate wealth in the hand of, I would say, foreign private entities here in your countries further. I don't think that they do that directly. They don't do that directly. I'm even myself, as an advisory board member of the German African Business Association, I'm even encouraging actively our own business interests, probably the same, but even other and new private entities to come to your countries. So my view of resolving this concentration issue, which is a burning one, also in Tanzania, I know that, is to bring other private investors, more private investors, domestic private investors, foreign private investors, but from all directions into your country in order to strengthen competition and weaken the position of these few incumbents, which have actually in other respects also a nefarious effect on your position. As we can see it from Kenya, where we discussed it earlier, the special Kenyan position is driven, as everybody knows, but by the few vested interests in horticulture who wanted to preserve their free import rights to Europe. Thank you very much for your attention, and thanks again.
Professor Asche, thank you for your presentation. At least you are not shy to respond to some of the questions. You tried your level best, and
it was wonderful. I liked the questions.
I like the questions. So next time, you are still welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, those for your remarks, a big clap for Mr.
Very good.